Hey guys, tonight we're sailing northway. Way north into the icy fjords of Scandinavia, where the air stings your nose and even the goats look like they could win a wrestling match. You're trudging through snow-packed soil outside a Viking longhouse, ducking under low wooden beams, the scent of smoked fish and damp wool curling up around your nose. And just as you settle in beside the hearth, someone turns to smile at you. With razor-sharp, pointed teeth, yeah. Welcome to Viking Bedtime. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. Let's see who's the latest night owl here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit by the fire and glance around. These people aren't dressed like TV Vikings, you know, all fur and eyeliner. No, this is the real deal. Coarse tunics, layers of wool and leather, wind-chapped cheeks. They look like they've been bracing against the cold since birth, which, honestly, they kind of have. You can hear the wind howling just outside the door, trying to claw its way into the longhouse, but thick planks of timber and layers of moss-chinked insulation hold it at bay. Inside, it's warm, smoky, cozy even. The flames cast flickering shadows over everything, over the shields hung neatly along the walls, the bundles of dried herbs tied with leather cords, and the tools that hang in quiet rows above the hearth. But your eyes keep getting drawn back to the guy with the teeth, front ones, top row, each carefully filed into a sharp point, and he's grinning. Now, to you, this is wild. But to him, it's Tuesday. Here's the thing about Vikings. Yes, they pillaged and plundered. But mostly, they lived. They farmed. They fished. They gossiped, probably. They raised families, navigated by the stars, built ships strong enough to cross oceans, and occasionally filed their teeth into decorative daggers. Just a bit of terrifying personal flair. Historians still argue whether tooth filing was common or rare, and whether it marked warriors, slaves, leaders, or just the village guy who was way too into metal. But the evidence keeps piling up in grave after grave. Unearthed jawbones show small, deliberate grooves carved into the enamel of front teeth, horizontal lines, jagged points. Always neat. Always intentional. You imagine sitting down to dinner next to someone with a mouth like that. You're about to take a bite of your roasted turnip and bam sudden vampire vibes. Except, instead of capes and brooding poetry, this guy probably just fixed your boat yesterday. Still, let's zoom out for a second. Picture yourself waking up in a Viking village. Roosters are crowing, even though it's pitch black because it's winter and the sun's feeling lazy. You wrap yourself in sheepskin and step outside into a world coated in snow and fog. You've got chores. Maybe you're feeding goats. Maybe you're hauling wood. Maybe you're helping that guy with the pointy teeth build a fence. Most of your day will be practical. Brutally so. But these people loved beauty too in their own rugged way. Intricate brooches, woven belts. Ironwork tools with unnecessary but beautiful carvings. They've decorated themselves because even when you're covered in mud and salt water, you still want to look cool. And maybe that's where the teeth come in. Some scholars believe that Viking tooth filing was a kind of body art, like a tattoo, not just for scaring enemies, but for telling a story. That's not as far-fetched as it sounds. We know the Vikings had a sense of individual style. They dyed their hair, they cleaned their nails. Roman writers complained about how much cleaner the Vikings were than them. No joke, one English monk basically whined that Viking men were stealing all the local women because they washed their faces. It's hard to compete with that, really. But back to the firelight, to that grin with the unervingly symmetrical points. You wonder how painful it must have been. No modern dentist. No Novocaine. Probably just a sharp stone and a friend with steady hands. Or maybe the person did it themselves, crouched over a bronze mirror, slowly carving the grooves one by one. Quirky side note? Some people today still file their teeth for aesthetic, cultural, or even spiritual reasons. From Indonesia to parts of Africa, the practice survives, centuries removed from Viking fjords. Which means if you think this sounds like ancient nonsense, well, human beings have always been doing weird things to their bodies. You might have a cousin with 5 piercings and a split tongue right now. And besides, the Vikings were nothing if not practical and theatrical. They lived in a world where storms could kill you, neighbors could raid you, and the gods might smite you on a whim. Looking intimidating? That was just smart insurance. So as the fire crackles low and you settle deeper into your furs, you think about what it must have been like to live in that world. Not as a TV caricature, but as someone who woke up, grabbed an axe, admired their freshly filed incisors and a polished metal plate, and thought, yep, ready for anything. You wake up still nestled under heavy furs, the scent of smoke and dried fish clinging to your hair. Outside, the sky is a dull gray, hard to tell if it's dawn or just another cloud-swallowed day in the land of long winters. You stretch, groan, and watch your breath puff into the chill. Welcome to another day in a Norse village where comfort exists, but only if you work hard to earn it. The Vikings didn't just survive here, they made it work. And not in a remote cabin with WIFA kind of way. More in a keep your sheep alive or starve kind of way. You toss aside your blanket and your feet find the packed dirt floor, cool and uneven. Outside, children are already squealing as they chase a chicken, yes. That chicken escaped again while smoke from neighboring longhouses rises like crooked fingers toward the blank sky. You step out and look around. The village is a tight cluster of wood and turf houses, some leaning like old men in the wind. There are carts with stubborn wheels, pens full of bleeding goats, and a blacksmith hammering away like it's his personal mission to wake up the entire valley. This is Viking high coziness achieved not with candles and sweaters, but with communal fire pits, fur-lined boots, and the knowledge that everyone's pulling together to stay warm, fed, and preferably not dead. You head toward the center of the village where smoke and laughter mingle. A woman is weaving on a warp-weighted loom, her fingers dancing across the threads like she's been doing it since birth. Probably has. The tunic she's working on has bright geometric patterns in red and indigo colors, not easy to make, mind you. You admire the craft, but more than that, the fact that she's still going despite the cold biting at her fingertips. Historians still argue whether Viking society was more egalitarian than others at the time, especially in terms of gender roles. While men did go raiding and trading, women often ran the household economies and wielded significant influence. Some women were buried with keys, symbolizing authority. Others with weapons, suggesting that some Viking ladies probably didn't mind a good scrap. Back in the square, you spot the same guy from last night, the one with the toothy grin. He's hauling a sack of grain over his shoulder and yelling something about the stew being too bland again. You chuckle. Even in ancient Scandinavia, people found time to complain about dinner. The truth is, most Viking days weren't about blood and battle. They were about survival, milking cows, building fences, fishing, mending sails. You join in, helping load a sled with firewood, and someone hands you a horn of sour-tasting milk that makes your eyebrows do strange things. You drink it anyway, because declining would be rude, and let's face it, sour milk beats dying of thirst. Later, you join a group repairing a boat. The wooden planks are fastened with iron rivets, sealed with animal fat and pine tar. Every tool they use is made with care axes, chisels, curved blades. And the smell of fresh pine, salt, and just a hint of seaweed makes you want to climb aboard and sail off immediately. You're about to suggest it when a girl your age smirks and says, "You'd lost 10 minutes before hurling." She's probably right. While the world thinks Viking and sees berserkers foaming at the mouth, these folks were also engineers, craftspeople, navigators. You know that iconic longship you've seen in museums or dramatic movies? Yeah, that thing was a technological marvel. Sleek, fast, capable of crossing oceans or slipping quietly up rivers. A Viking could raid a monastery in England before the monks even knew what hit them and be back home in time for dinner. And no, they didn't all raid. Plenty of Norse people traded peacefully with other cultures, sold goods, or just settled somewhere nicer. The Viking Age was as much about migration and exchange as it was about violence. Even the word Viking might have originally referred to the act of going on an expedition, not a specific people. Sort of like saying you're going adventuring or cruising ... bet with more axes. You take a break from all this productivity and sit near the fire pit again. Someone's cooking a stew that smells like onions, fish, and ambition. A child runs by with a wooden sword and a helmet that's clearly too big. It slides down over his eyes and he trips only to laugh like it's the best joke in the world. And then one of the elders starts telling his story. It's a saga, a long winding tale full of heroes, revenge, curses, dragons, metaphorical or otherwise, and ships that talk. His voice is gravelly but rhythmic. You get lost in it. The tale has that dreamy quality where you're not quite sure what's real and what's just exaggerated memory. But tucked in there amid the curses and bravery, he mentioned something interesting, a warrior whose filed teeth shone in the moonlight, sending fear into his enemies' hearts. You blink. There it is again. This strange detail. This casual mention of the sharpened teeth like it's totally normal, not even worth pausing over, which makes you wonder, was it really that common? Or is it just a storytelling flourish, like the glowing eyes or the thunderous footsteps? Quirky tidbit here. Some believe these stories were passed down not just to entertain, but to teach. Tooth filing might have started as a way to mimic saga heroes, to look fierce, to be brave. Like a medieval version of cosplay, only, forever etched into your dental record. And maybe that's the point. In a world where wolves lurked in forests and rival clans could attack at any moment, looking scary might have been just as important as being scary. If your first impression was, I have teeth like a bear trap, then hey, maybe the guy picking fights decides to pick someone else. As the story winds down, the elder nods off mid-sentence, and everyone lets him sleep. The fire crackles, the stew bubbles, and the village settles into that quiet hum of evening, where the cold creeps in just a little faster than you'd like. You lean back and exhale, thinking about what life really meant here. It wasn't all raiding and roaring. It was rope braiding, stew making, sagas by firelight, and yeah, sometimes filing your teeth into points because the world was scary and so were you. You're awake before the sun, mostly because the goats don't care about your need for sleep. They've started yelling. Again. You roll over under your rough woolen blanket and try to pretend you're somewhere with central heating and silence, but the call of Viking duty waits for no one. Especially not you. Outside, the wind hits your face like a slap with a frozen fish. You squint up at the sky, it's still that grayish. Could be dawn, could be apocalypse color, but the villagers are already moving. There's an odd buzz in the air. Excitement maybe, or chaos. Could be both. You're about to ask someone what's going on when you spot the ships. Long, narrow, with dragon heads carved into the bows and painted shields strapped along the sides. The sails are furled for now, but the crews are busy checking the rigging. Sharpening blades, loading bundles of food and buckets of fish. It's not just boat maintenance, it's preparation. You, my friend, are about to go raiding. Now, calm down. No one's expecting you to swing an axe. You're more of an emotional support raider at this point. But it's worth knowing what you're sailing into. Because contrary to the modern image of berserkers screaming into battle with no plan and even less hygiene, real Viking raids were surprisingly organized. Think of it like a terrifying group project, only with more chainmail and less passive-aggressive emails. The ship's captain, likely a chieftain or someone who at least owns most of his fingers, gives you the once-over. He grunts approval, you take that as a compliment and climb aboard. You settle in among a crew of hardened faces. One man is adjusting his boots, another is checking the leather wrappings on his sword hilt. And sitting across from you, of course, is your toothy friend. His sharpened grin flashes like a fox in the firelight. He looks positively thrilled. Historians still argue whether tooth filing was something done before a raid to intimidate, or whether it was more of a permanent identifier like, ah yes, that guy's raided 10 villages, look at his dental work. Either way, you're sitting next to what looks like a medieval James Bond villain. The crew shoves off. The longship glides over the water with eerie smoothness. You're surrounded by fjords, massive, stony cliffs rising like ancient gods from the icy sea. The oarsmen fall into a rhythm, the ship cutting forward with a grace that doesn't match the panic rising in your stomach. You sail for hours, maybe days. It's hard to tell time when your only clock is cloud coverage and gut instinct. Eventually, you spot land, a small coastal village, stone buildings, a monastery on a hill. The crew grows quiet, focused. Axes are checked again. Helmets adjusted. A prayer is muttered, though whether to Odin or for sheer luck, you're not sure. Now, here's the thing. Vikings didn't just pick targets at random. They scouted. They listened. They timed their attacks for when defenses were weakest, often at dawn or during religious festivals. And monasteries? Full of gold, books, and conveniently, pacifists. Low risk, high reward. Like raiding a bakery that also happens to be a bank. As you pull closer to shore, the men rise. Shields come up, a few yell. Most stay silent. The smell of fear mixes with salt and sweat. You watch your sharp-toothed companion leap off the boat and charge forward like it's the best day of his life. You stay on the ship. Good call. From your awkwardly safe spot, you see flashes of movement, screams, a bell ringing wildly, people running. You should feel guilty, but mostly you're just glad you didn't have to run in 50 pounds of iron. When the dust settles, the crew returns with loot coins, goblets, cloaks, some fancy sandals someone thought were hilarious. You help pull the ship back into the water. The adrenaline is palpable. Everyone's talking at once. Except your pointy-toothed friend. He just grins, blood on his cheek, like he's posing for a metal album cover. Historians still debate whether these raids were driven more by hunger and poverty or by pure opportunism. Was it about survival? A way to gain land? Or was it prestige clout chasing Viking style? Whatever the reason, they did it well. And often. On the way back, the mood shifts. The oarsmen sing low, grumbly chants that feel like they belong to the sea itself. You drift off to the rhythm of waves against wood, the sail creaking overhead, and the quiet clink of coins somewhere near your feet. And for a moment, just a moment, you think, I get it. The thrill. The purpose, the weirdly intimate silence after shared violence. Quirky tidbit? Some raiders brought back not just treasure, but stories, languages, even recipes. There are records of Norse people adapting spices and dishes from the Mediterranean. Because nothing says successful conquest like inventing a better stew. Back on familiar shores, the villagers welcome the raiders home with cheers, stew, and probably some very passive-aggressive goat complaints. You climb off the ship and stretch, feeling every muscle in your legs scream. Your sharp-toothed friend clasps your shoulder and says something that sounds like approval. You nod, pretending to understand, but mostly thinking about your own teeth. You touch them unconsciously, square, smooth, utterly unimpressive. And you wonder, what would it take for you to sit in front of someone with a file, clench your jaw, and say, make me terrifying? The next morning, your jaw still aches, not because you did anything to it, but because all that thinking about tooth filing has made you hyper-aware of your own dental situation. You run your tongue along your front teeth again. Still smooth, still not terrifying. You're not sure if you're relieved or disappointed. Back in the village, the raiding party is being celebrated. Someone roasted a whole sheep. There's mead. There's music. One guy's playing a stringed instrument that looks like it was built out of leftover boat scraps and misplaced ambition. You sip something warm, possibly fermented berries. Possibly regret and try not to make eye contact with anyone too enthusiastic about reenacting the raid over dinner. You're still fixated on the teeth. Why would someone choose to file their teeth into points? You think pain would be a good enough deterrent. And this isn't like cutting your hair or getting a tattoo. You can't exactly grow your teeth back. Yet, as you look around, you realize something odd. No one seems to think it's weird. No one's staring. No one's whispering, oh, that guy again with the demon mouth. Some do it to impress, some to scare. Others just because they can. Spiritual leaders? Or was it more fluid like piercings today, signaling nothing more than personal taste and a high pain threshold? You wander away from the party and find yourself near the edge of the village. The blacksmith's forge glows in the evening dark, casting orange light over his anvil. But you're more interested in the smaller hut next door. Inside, an older woman is hunched over a child, carefully braiding beads into the girl's hair. She glances up and sees you lingering. With a crooked finger, she beckons you in. The hut smells of herbs and wet fur. You duck your head and step inside. On the walls hang small tool scrapers, awls, thin files that catch the firelight with sharp glints. She offers you a seat. Then, without speaking, she picks up one of the files and holds it up. You know what she's asking. You touch your teeth again, still unsure. Still slightly squeamish. She grins not with menace, but with quiet amusement. Then she reaches into a small pouch and pulls out something that looks like a polished stone tooth, carved, grooved, decorative. A model. A guide, quirky detail time. Some researchers think Viking tooth filing might have been ritualized. That is, done in a ceremonial setting, maybe even with music or chants. Not just for fashion or war, but as a rite of passage. Like a coming-of-age trip, only instead of getting a new phone, you get permanent dental aggression. Imagine you're 16. You're ready to prove yourself. The village healer or maybe the local toothsmith, because that was probably a thing, sits you down. And everyone watches as the grooves are etched, one by one. Blood, sure. Pain, obviously. But when it's over, you rise a different person. Marked, A little terrifying, a lot cooler. The woman shows you a row of small flat stones, each one smooth on one side, coarse on the other. These, she mimes, are for grinding. Slowly, carefully, over time. It's not a one-day thing. This takes weeks, maybe months. Filing a tooth to a point without breaking it requires precision, patience, and the ability to not flinch when you hit a nerve, so it wasn't impulsive. It wasn't done in a drunken haze after one too many horns of mead. It was deliberate. You leave the hut quietly, brain buzzing. The moon is out now, bright enough to light your path. You walk through the quiet village, past empty animal pens and silent longhouses. Somewhere a dog barks once, then stops. And you wonder how many people here have done it. Not just the guy with the obvious grin, but others. People who filed one tooth, maybe two, kept it hidden unless needed. A flash of fangs in battle. A glint of intimidation in a tavern brawl. Not every Viking walked around looking like a horror movie. Some probably wore their sharpness like a secret weapon. Historians still haven't found a consistent pattern. Some burials have filed teeth. Most don't. Some graves with fancy weapons show no signs of modification, while others pour shallow, forgotten reveal mouths lined with filed enamel. It's frustrating and fascinating, because it means we still don't know the whole story. Maybe we never will, but you're here, walking the path, meeting the people, listening to their stories. And each step brings you closer to understanding why someone hundreds of years ago sat down in the firelight and thought, I want to look like a bite through a sword. You shake off the dream and roll out of bed or out of wool-covered floor, really. The longhouse is mostly quiet, just the low murmur of someone grinding grain in a stone bowl near the hearth. You nod at them. They nod back. The fire crackles like it remembers something you don't. Outside, a thin mist hangs over the village. The fjord is still, glassy, reflecting mountains like a smug mirror. You walk toward the forest's edge, needing space to think. Your brain still itches with questions. The tooth filing wasn't cosmetic. It wasn't random. It wasn't even that common. But when it happened, it meant something. And you've heard another theory. You sit on a mossy rock and stare at your reflection in a shallow stream, as if your modern molars are going to give you answers. Spoiler, they don't, but your mind drifts to the idea you overheard last night by the fire, the war paint theory. You think about it. Vikings were no strangers to body decoration. They used combs, made soap, and probably wore eyeliner. No, really bits of crushed mineral have been found in graves. The smoky eye may be older than we thought, but what if filing teeth wasn't just permanent body art ... but part of a full face paint ritual? Some archaeologists found faint traces of pigment black soot, red ochre in the grooves of Viking teeth. Now, that could be contamination, sure. But it could also mean that after filing, they painted the grooves to make the teeth stand out even more, like stripes. Like war paint, historians still argue whether this pigment theory holds up. It's hard to test it from someone who's been underground for 1,000 years. But let's suspend disbelief for a second. Imagine you're preparing for battle. You've oiled your leather armor. You've braided your hair. You've smeared black ash across your cheekbones. And then, last step, you rub charcoal into the horizontal lines carved across your teeth. You run your tongue across the gritty surface. You smile at your reflection, all angles and darkness, and even you flinch a little. Now you look like a monster. You march with your warband, shouting, shields banging. The opposing side catches a glimpse of your teeth, maybe in torchlight, maybe in the brief second before you strike. That painted grin becomes the last thing they see. And then your reputation grows. Whispers follow. They mark their teeth like wolves. They paint their mouths like death gods. Humans across cultures have always had a thing for dental drama. So maybe it's not so strange that Vikings, too, use their mouths as a canvas for fear and reverence. You remember something else from the saga you heard, how warriors would sometimes wear death faces into battle, painting themselves to resemble corpses or spirits. Not to look good, but to look inhuman, invincible. Already dead. What if the foul teeth were part of that? Not just a personal choice, but a ceremonial one. Something you did on the eve of battle, not to scare others, but to convince yourself that pain doesn't matter. That you've already crossed the line. That the fight can't take anything from you because you've already given it something. The stream babbles softly next to you like it agrees. Or like it's very politely telling you to stop overthinking it. You stand and head back to the village. Along the way, you pass a boy crouched on a rock, carving a stick with a small blade. He looks up, then grins a full child's grin, smooth teeth. Untouched. But next to him, an older man stands with a fire-worn tunic and a face like cracked bark. He gives you the tiniest nod, then flashes a grin. 2 front teeth, each with 3 horizontal grooves, just deep enough to catch the light, and maybe. The ash, it's subtle. You wouldn't notice if you weren't looking. But now that you are looking, it's hard to forget. You walk through the village with new eyes. How many more have those marks? Are they hiding them? Are they waiting for the next raid, the next ritual, the next reason to smear soot and become something else? The longhouse is busy when you return. Preparations again, another journey perhaps. Another ceremony. You help stack wood, pass bundles of dried herbs, pretend you don't keep peeking at people's teeth. That night, the fire burns lower than usual. The air feels heavy, like the village is holding its breath. A man stands up tall, older, hair like snow, and starts speaking in a slow, deep voice. A chant. The words ripple through the room. Others join. No instruments, just rhythm, just voice. And as they sing, a few step forward. Quietly, slowly, one removes his tunic. Another kneels beside the fire and rubs ash onto his cheeks, then his forehead. And then, yes, into the grooves of his teeth. They glisten black, jagged, ceremonial. You realize you're watching the transformation happen. They're not just sharpening themselves. They're becoming something else. And for the first time, you stop thinking about how painful it must have been, and start thinking about how powerful it must have felt. By now, your curiosity about Viking teeth has turned from a passing interest into a full-blown obsession. You can't look at someone's mouth without wondering what's behind the smile or the grimace, as is often the case here. The next day, you find yourself tagging along with a small group headed beyond the village. They're heading toward the burial mounds, a cluster of soft hills beneath twisted trees and wind-swept grass. Some of these graves are centuries old, even by Viking standards. The dead here lie still beneath stone markers, bones curled under layers of time and cold earth. It's not spooky. Not really, more like reverent, quiet. You walk softly without being told to. It just feels right. The local wise woman, yes, the same one who offered to file your teeth with a stone the other day, guides the group. Her name is something that sounds like Yora when you hear it spoken. Her hands are calloused, her eyes sharp. She stops at a particular mound and gestures for everyone to sit. This is where, she explains, they found him. The first man in the village known to have filed his teeth. The grave was uncovered years ago during a harsh storm. Erosion peeled back the earth and revealed a jawbone jutting out like a warning sign. When they finally unearthed it properly, the rest of the skeleton was there tall, well-preserved, clutching the remnants of a sword that had long since rusted to memory. But the teeth, that's what got everyone whispering. 2 canines, both filed into points. Each with horizontal grooves so precise, it made modern archaeologists double-check their tools. One tooth had a blackened stain in the groove. Soot, they guessed, or iron, or both. Historians still argue whether this was ceremonial burial paint, a trace of old fire rituals, or simply the result of centuries underground. But it didn't matter to the people here. They had their proof. This wasn't legend, it was legacy, quirky twist. They say his grave glowed the night they found it. Probably just moonlight and adrenaline. But still, makes a good story. You walk quietly as the group circles the mound. Yora kneels, presses her hand to the earth, and closes her eyes. For a moment, the wind dies. The forest hushes. A raven caws once, then flies off. Later, around the fire, you listen to more tales, this time of warriors who died with smiles on their faces, teeth bared like wolves. They say those were the fearless ones. The ones who believed they'd be feasting in Valhalla by morning. You ask Yora if all those stories are true. She snorts. True enough to scare your enemies, she says. That's what matters. Not even out of tradition, but because it's cool. Because it marks you. Because even in a world this cold, being feared is a kind of warmth. You fall asleep wondering how many warriors went into battle grinning through painted grooves, hoping the enemy would take one look and run. And how many succeeded? The next morning, something changes. A man from another village arrives. His clothes are different, heavier wool, stripes dyed with indigo. He's missing 2 fingers, carries a wooden staff carved with runes, and wears a necklace of bones that definitely don't belong to rabbits. But more striking than any of that? His teeth. Filed flat, not into points, not decorative grooves, just gone. Ground down like someone started to make a bite mark in a god and didn't stop until they were finished. He talks with Yura for a long time, and although you don't catch every word, you hear enough to gather one thing: he disagrees with the painting theory. Strongly. He believes the teeth were part of a death ritual, not war paint, but preparation for the afterlife. A mark that said, I died proud, I died fierce. Let the gods see me coming. Or even punitive punishment for betrayal or cowardice. Maybe it was all of those, maybe none. The stranger leaves at dawn the next day, taking his runes and his unsettling grin with him. You're left staring at the fire again, wondering what kind of culture sharpens its smiles and what kind of world demands it. That afternoon, you find yourself back at the burial mounds. Alone this time. You sit by the edge of that first grave and think about the man beneath it. What his life was like. Whether he volunteered for the ritual or was told he had no choice. Whether he winced when the stone touched enamel. Whether he smiled when it was done. You run your tongue across your own teeth again. Still smooth. Still soft. Still yours. And for now, that's enough. The village is quieter now. The last of the visiting warriors have left, taking their stories, their soot-blackened grins, and their many conflicting opinions with them. You expected to feel relief, but instead, you're left with a strange hollowness. Like you just binge-watched an epic show and now you're stuck in the silence of the credits. You spend the morning helping mend fishing nets. Not glamorous, but necessary. And honestly, your fingers are grateful to do something repetitive while your brain continues to spiral down the black-toothed rabbit hole. You tie, loop, knot, repeat, and every loop is another question. Who started it? Why? Did it spread from one village like a trend, or pop up in isolated places like ancient fashion converging by accident? Historians still argue over the origin. Some say it began along the eastern Baltic coast, others point towards Swedish territories. And there's even a theory that Viking raiders may have picked up the practice from other cultures while traveling, meaning the whole terrifying tooth thing could be an import. Like the world's sharpest souvenir. You set the net aside and stretch your shoulders. The sun's come out barely, like a pale coin behind thinning clouds. It lights up the fjord and sparkles on the waves. The air smells of salt and wet pine. You find yourself wandering to the edge of the water, boots crunching over gravel, and sit on a log that may or may not also be a discarded boat part. That's when you meet him. He's older than most. Gray-bearded, with a weathered face and a long scar across his temple that looks like a lightning bolt. His clothes are patched, his eyes sharp. And when he smiles, you spot them teeth filed into thin slivers, almost needle-like. Different from the others, subtler, more unnerving, he doesn't say much at first. Just watches the water like it owes him answers. Then, without turning, he says, "They used to whisper that I ate men. But I let them believe it. Easier than fighting everyone. But it did, every day for a week. You feel it in your skull. Like thunder behind your eyes." The old man doesn't say much else. Eventually he stands, adjusts his cloak, and walks off with the grace of someone who's been through things you can't pronounce. You watch him go, realizing you've just spoken with a living piece of history. A man who didn't just read about filed teeth, he lived it. Breathed it. They into life with it. Later you ask Yora about him. She sighs. His name is Rain. Nobody files like that anymore. Too painful. Too ... ancient. That's what this is, isn't it? More than a trend. More than a scare tactic. It's a bridge between flesh and myth. Between the real and the theatrical. You start to think of filed teeth not as accessories, but artifacts, living symbols that walk and talk and raise goats. That night, a storm rolls in from the sea. The wind wails through the village like a banshee with boundary issues. The longhouse creaks. Smoke curls up from the hearth in jittery spirals. You sit by the fire and listen to the howling outside, the way the walls groan, the way the old beams flex. And again, someone starts a story. This one's different. It's not about raids or gods. It's about a boy small, quiet, unnoticed, who decided to carve his place into legend. He didn't have wealth. He didn't have strength. What he had was courage, and a very sharp rock. He filed his teeth, one by one, while no one watched. And when the next battle came, he bared them. Not because he wanted to be seen as a beast, but because he wanted to prove he wasn't afraid of pain. He wasn't afraid of death. He was the storm. When the story ends, no one speaks. The fire pops, the wind screams. And you think, maybe it wasn't about fear, maybe it was about power. Not the kind that comes from violence, the kind that comes from choosing your pain, from shaping your own edges, from looking into a mirror and deciding what kind of monster or hero you want to become. The storm lingers into morning, rattling doors and bending trees like they owe it money. You pull your cloak tighter and step outside, boots sinking slightly into wet earth. The fjord looks angry waves slapping the shore in impatient rhythms, white foam licking at the docks. No one's going out to sea today. Not even the bravest fishermen feel like challenging a storm that seems personal. With nothing better to do, you drift toward the longhouse where the villagers keep their artifacts, old weapons. Stones carved with runes, bones of animals long hunted to extinction. It's not a museum, not really. More like a room of memories nobody has quite figured out what to do with. The walls are lined with shelves and each item has its own vibe. I was important once, please ask me how. Maybe someone who once grinned with triangular teeth. Maybe someone who didn't. In the far corner, you spot something odd. A skull human, nestled into a cradle of dried moss and twine almost respectfully. The jawbone is slightly open, teeth fully exposed. And there they are, four upper front teeth, carefully filed into steep points, like the wearer was always mid-snarl. You lean closer. There are dark lines carved into the enamel. Not horizontal like the others you've seen. These are vertical. Historians still argue what different carving directions meant, if anything. Was it a clan symbol? A rank? Just a personal aesthetic? Or did it reflect something deeper? Religious alignment? Ritual role? Dental astrology? Either way, it's not subtle, and it's not random. The skull watches you watch it. Yora appears behind you like a stealthy grandmother ghost. That one, she says, belonged to a man who claimed he'd spoken to hell. The hell? Quirky tidbit time. Viking mythology is full of gods and realms. The hell ruler of the underworld was often seen with ambiguity. She wasn't evil, just inevitable. Some tales described her as half-living, half-dead, her face split between beauty and decay. Not a demon, but not someone you'd swipe right on either. So it makes a kind of poetic sense. To file your teeth to mirror her duality, to claim both beauty and death in your smile. Yora continues, voice soft. Some thought he was mad. Others followed him, there were. A few with those same markings. You won't find many now, but back then? He had a following. Just like the teeth. You feel suddenly aware of your own heartbeat. The foul teeth tradition wasn't one tradition. It was many. Layers of meaning stacked like runes on a stone: intimidation, identity, transformation, spirituality. Each person who did it probably had a different reason. And each person who saw it layered on their own assumptions. It was a conversation, an enamel. You return to the village and find yourself speaking less. Not because you're afraid, but because the silence seems to mean more now. That night, you sit with Rain, the old man with the needlepoint teeth. He's sharpening a fishing hook with a whetstone, and you ask if he ever regretted doing it. No, he says. But it wasn't what I expected. So it made you more of a target? Just fragments of smiles buried in the dirt, daring us to guess what they meant. The fire pops. Rain leans back. Still, he says, I like the way they look. But every one of them had to decide, what do you want your enemies to see right before the moment matters most? The next morning, you're woken not by goats or storms, but by a dull thud, thud, thud echoing from the hillside. You pull on your cloak, still smelling faintly of smoke and salted wool, and follow the sound. A small group has gathered near the edge of the forest where the soil is soft and dark. They're digging. But it's not a grave they're working on. It's an ungrave. You approach slowly and learn. They've discovered something unusual while collecting clay for pottery, a collapsed chamber beneath the earth, framed in rotting wood and packed with stones. A burial, yes, but not in the usual Viking style. No mound. No grave goods on the surface. Just earth that gave way like a secret it was tired of keeping. One of the diggers gestures you over. Inside the shallow pit, you see the beginnings of a skeleton, ribs half crushed by time, fingers curled around nothing. And at the top of it all, barely visible through the muck, are teeth. Filed, of course, but not like before. Instead of grooves or points, these are edged with tiny triangles. Dozens of them, like a jagged border around each incisor. They shimmer faintly in the sun as someone brushes away dirt with careful fingers. Quirky find of the day. One of the triangles still holds a speck of red pigment. Not charcoal, not blood ochre. Earth paint. Used in cave paintings, burial rituals, and apparently Viking dental fashion. Historians still argue over the use of ochre in Viking funerals. Some say it was symbolic of rebirth, others link it to protection, painting the dead to guard them in the afterlife. But on teeth? That's new. Yora arrives. Her face tightens when she sees the skull. This one, she says, was not buried by friends. You wander down to the shoreline, letting the waves soak your boots. You picture that person, the one with the triangle teeth, staring into a polished piece of metal or a pool of water, watching their reflection transform as they mark their smile. What were they hoping for? Glory? Power? Acceptance? Or maybe they simply wanted to look like the stories in their head. You think about shame, about how cultures mark their dead. Some get pyres. Some get hills. Some get nothing. And yet, centuries later, it's the foul teeth that remain. Not the fancy swords, not the feathers. Just those stubborn little bones whispering, I was here. I mattered. And then one of them, a man with a voice like carved oak, says, no, he was just loud in the way people didn't like. A way of saying, you can take my land, my name, my place, but not my bite. The village, to its credit, does not flinch from its own history. That evening, someone starts telling stories again, only this time, they're not about war or glory. They're about the strange ones, the dreamers. The silent men who carved stars into their shields. The women who wore bare teeth as earrings. The children who danced barefoot in the snow and whispered to the sky. You sit quietly, letting the stories pass through you like wind through pine. Then someone says your name. You look up. It's Yura. She holds out something small in her hand. A tooth, filed, marked, painted red. But it's not real, it's a replica. Made of bone or wood, carved for teaching a ritual or just to hold the idea of the thing. Keep it, she says, so you don't forget what people carry in their mouths. What pattern you would have chosen. What message you'd etch into your smile. And even though your mouth remains unmarked, you can feel the echo of all the others. Grinning, daring, waiting. The wind dies completely the next morning. The stillness is strange after days of howling air and sideways rain. The village feels like it's paused, like the world's taken a breath and is waiting to see what you'll do next. You wander as usual, but this time your feet take you uphill, toward a stone outcrop where the oldest of the elders go to tell stories or just be left alone. You pass a woman weaving fishnets from gut string, a boy carving a toy horse from driftwood, and a goat who's clearly planning something criminal. At the top of the hill, you find a man with more wrinkles than expression, wrapped in wool, sitting cross-legged before a small fire. You're not sure if he's awake until he speaks. You've seen the teeth, he says. Not a question. Just a truth. You sit without asking. People always think it was just for war, he continues. But we had war without them. We had war with axes and spears and words. Sharp teeth didn't make us killers. They were carving them to be seen. He tells you about a woman named Brynhild, who lived generations before him. She was known for her laughter and for climbing trees faster than anyone else in the village. One winter, when wolves prowled too close, she carved her teeth into little crescents. Said it would make them hesitate. You chuckle. Did it work? Historians still puzzle over the gender breakdown of Viking tooth modification. Most found examples come from male skeletons, but that may be skewed by excavation bias or burial practices. Many believe women filed too, but fewer graves have survived, and even fewer were given the same ritual attention. Yet oral traditions don't always follow bones. The elder's story of Brynhild is proof, and he has others. A man who filed his teeth to resemble the rays of the sun, 8 sharp spokes across the front, gleaming in torchlight. A child barely past 10 winters who filed one single tooth after his mother died to carry her memory in my mouth. Bite brew grief. The elder holds out something wrapped in cloth. Inside, a row of carved replica teeth, strung together like a necklace. Each one a different design. Points, grooves, arrows, spirals. It's not decorative, it's archival. These, he says, are the stories we didn't write down. Not facts, exactly more like fragments, emotions, impressions, the way people felt about what they did to their teeth. Some called it claiming the self. Others said it was surrendering to fate. but no one ever said it was casual. You leave the hill before sunset, your mind heavy and quiet. That evening, the longhouse is unusually full. Word is spread about the newly uncovered burial, the triangle teeth, the ochre stain. People want answers. Or at least someone to nod and say, yes, this meant something. A permanent whisper that said, this is who I chose to be, even when it hurt. Historians still debate the psychology of pain in Viking rituals. Some see it as spiritual, transcending the body to connect with gods. Others frame it as communal shared pain bonding groups together, but you wonder if it's simpler. Maybe they filed their teeth for the same reason someone today gets a tattoo, or pierces something, or cuts their hair during grief. Not for aesthetics. For control. You lie awake that night, staring at the thatched roof above you, tracing your tongue across your smooth, safe, unremarkable teeth. They feel soft now, not weak, just undecorated. Like walls without paintings. And for the first time, you feel a little envious, not of the pain, not of the blood, but of the commitment. Of doing something so permanent, so defining, that you never have to explain who you are again. You just smile. And the world understands. By now, you've been in the village long enough to notice rhythms. The way the blacksmith pauses before each strike. The way the children chant nonsense as they race around goat pens. The way the villagers glance at the horizon before dinner as if checking whether the gods have plans. But this morning, something different stirs. A small group prepares for a journey, not a raid. Not trade, a pilgrimage. You're invited, kind of. Yora tells you that if you want to understand why some Vikings filed their teeth, really understand it, you'll need to see where the oldest stories began. Not in the village, but in the caves beyond the northern cliffs, so obviously you go. The journey takes the better part of a day. First by foot, then by a shallow boat dragged through marshland, then by foot again. The wind whistles through twisted pine trees. Birds you don't recognize scream like tiny dragons. Eventually, the forest opens into a rocky plain. And there, nestled into the side of a cliff like a secret, is a yawning black mouth, the cave. It smells of wet stone and something older. You light torches. The flickering light dances across the walls, revealing crude drawings, stick figures, animals, spiral suns, and in one particularly eerie corner, teeth, dozens of them, jagged, pointed, grooved, arranged in rows like grinning ghosts. Quirky fact? There are ancient Scandinavian carvings of what look like teeth dating back to the Bronze Age long before the Viking period. No one agrees on what they mean, but some believe they symbolize speech, power, or protection. Yor stands before the wall and begins to chant, not loudly, but with the kind of softness that feels like a key turning in an invisible lock. The others join in. You don't know the words, but you feel them in your ribs, in your teeth, in your chest. This was not a casual gathering place. This was sacred. Historians still argue whether Vikings had religious temples in the traditional sense. Some say sacred groves and caves like this were as close as it got. Places where stories were told, ancestors were honored, and yes, teeth were possibly marked in ritual. You watch as one of the villagers takes a small bone from a pouch and carefully traces one of the carved teeth on the wall. He's not defacing it. It's more like ... communion. Yora whispers beside you, this is where we believe the first ones came. But what if some of them were also philosophers, mystics? People who looked at a rock and thought, if I suffer here, maybe I'll understand something no one else does. You explore the cave further. One passage leads to a chamber painted with swirls and shapes that make your head buzz just looking at them. There's a low altar stone smoothed by centuries of hands. And beside it, etched into the wall, a face, not smiling. Not angry, just ... still, its teeth are marked. Like all the others. You wonder how many stood here and decided to do it. To take a sharp stone and start scraping. Maybe there was a guide. Maybe it was private. Maybe it was done in the dark with only breath and heartbeat and courage. Historians still can't agree on whether these caves were common or unique to a few groups, but the evidence here feels undeniable. This wasn't cosmetic. This was sacred branding. You don't speak as the group finishes their visit. No one does. It feels wrong to break the air with modern language. When you emerge into daylight, everything seems louder. Birds, wind, your own thoughts. You walk in silence back through the marshes, the sun low in the sky, light catching the tips of grass like tiny fireflies. That night, back in the village, you lie on your back near the fire pit and stare at the stars. You think about the wall of teeth in the cave, about the face with a still expression, about the idea that your mouth, the place where you breathe, speak, sing, shout, pray, is also the place where you claim your power. You trace your tongue along your own enamel again. Still smooth, still quiet, but maybe not for long. Because something is shifting, not in your body, but in your understanding. The filed teeth weren't random. They were marks of intent, declarations, questions carved into the body that said, who am I, really? What do I believe in? What am I willing to suffer to become that person? And maybe, just maybe, that's the most Viking question of all. You wake the next morning with a chill in your spine and a strange weight in your chest. It's not dread, not exactly. More like you've seen something important and now you have to decide what to do with it. That cave is still whispering in your mind, not words. Just presence. You spend the day watching. Not out of laziness, out of observation. There's an older woman teaching a group of teens how to stitch leather for boots. She uses a bone needle with astonishing speed, and her voice carries steady through the wind. You notice that two of the students' brothers maybe both have one canine filed to a short point. Just one. You ask later why just one. The reply? For balance. The left tooth is my past. The right's my future. I only trust one of them. The teeth aren't just a tradition, they're personal. Every person you meet has their own story. Some file for war, others for faith, others ... just to feel seen. In fact, it's that sense of visibility that keeps coming up. Historians still can't agree on whether Viking tooth modification was widely accepted or only practiced by fringe groups. Some burials show it plainly, while others equally wealthy, equally warrior-like show no sign of it. Was it optional? Encouraged? Forbidden unless earned? There's a chance you realize that filed teeth were both status symbols and acts of defiance, like wearing a leather jacket to church. You help the leather worker sharpen her blade, and she talks while she works. She tells you of a man who came to the village decades ago, had every tooth filed and painted black. Not the black charcoal mixed with seal fat. Sadi wanted to swallow death and digest it. He choked on a fishbone, she replies, without looking up. Death had the last laugh. At one point, you sit by a fire and listen to two warriors compare the sound of battle cries, not strength, not weapon choice. Sound, one of them insists that a filed set of teeth makes your voice more intimidating. It echoes differently, he says, tapping his throat. The other disagrees. No, it's the eyes that do it. Teeth are just decoration. The strange comfort of being surrounded by people who believe in transformation enough to hurt for it. This isn't about vanity. It never was. It's about making something internal visible. The kind of things most people keep buried: courage, pain, devotion, fury. These Vikings wore in their mouths. Historians still argue whether filed teeth were permanent rites of passage or temporary trends. Did people regret it? Did they ever try to cover them up later, like an awkward tattoo from a previous life? There's no dental record for second thoughts. But judging by the pride in people's eyes, even decades after the fact, you doubt it. You notice a man watching you from across the fire. Quiet scar across one cheek and a jawline like it was carved from frozen oak. He beckons you over. You go. He speaks low. I filed mine when my brother died. Promised he'd return with a silver cup. Never did. Later that night, lying in the longhouse, you think about everyone you've met. The whispering children, the chanting elders. The mourners who carry memory and bone. Each person's mouth tells a different story. And maybe that's the point. Filed teeth weren't about conformity. They were about individuality in a culture that prized unity. About saying, this is what matters to me, even if it costs me, even if it scars me, even if I can never go back. You roll over and watch the shadows stretch along the rafters. Somewhere nearby, someone snores like a glacier shifting in its sleep, and you smile smooth, round, uncut. But now you know. Even unfiled, you've been marked. Morning returns with a golden hush. The storm-tossed clouds of earlier days have retreated, leaving behind a sky so blue it almost feels smug about it. The village stretches and yawns in its usual way, goats bleating, smoke curling lazily from chimneys, and the smell of something slightly burnt wafting from the baker's hut. You take the slow path down to the riverbank, where reeds lean into the current and frogs leap like they've got somewhere important to be. There, you find Rain again, the elder with the needle-point teeth skimming small stones across the water with surprising accuracy for someone who moves like driftwood. You sit beside him. I had a dream last night, he says, without looking at you. You wait. I dreamed my teeth fell out. Every one. Just. He mimics a silent spill with his hands into the snow. Across cultures, it often means loss of power, fear of aging, or anxiety over identity. In a Viking context, it takes on new weight. If your teeth are filed, marked, ritualized, then to lose them, even in sleep, is to lose a part of your story. And in a world without mirrors or selfies or Twitter bios, your teeth were your statement. You decide to share your own dream, not about teeth exactly, but about standing in the cave again. Only this time, the wall of carved fangs was moving. Breathing like the history itself had lungs. Rain nods. Good, that means it's in you now. Same with the teeth. A boy sharpens his blade with unnecessary flair and mutters, "No one listens when your mouth is soft." You remember a line you heard once in the longhouse. The gods don't remember cowards. Maybe the teeth were a way to make sure someone remembered you, even if the gods had lousy memory. In the afternoon, the village holds a small ceremony, nothing grand. Just a circle around a new fire, a song sung low, a piece of meat passed hand to hand. It's for a young man leaving for the Eastern Islands. His teeth are newly filed thin, delicate grooves that catch the light like river ripples. You ask why he did it now, just before leaving. He shrugs. To carry the village with me. And I smile. In fact, the village elder pats his head and says, he feels it too. Historians still argue whether the tooth marking was always a rite of preparation, or if it sometimes came afterward, a reflection of having survived something big. Trauma, grief, victory, isolation. Maybe it was a second chance at identity, because the world doesn't always let you choose who you are in the moment. But sometimes afterward, you get to tell the story your way. That night, as the fire crackles low and the stars fall into their ancient places overhead, you find yourself by the river again. You crouch beside the water, stare at your own reflection. You imagine it. Points, grooves, maybe even a triangle painted red. It wouldn't change who you are, but it would declare it. Not to the world, but to yourself. You lean forward, smile, and for the briefest moment you see something else smile back. Not a monster, not a god. Just you seen. The next morning, you wake to music. Not a harp or flute, but a rhythmic tapping like bone on bone or stone against antler. You rise, curious, and follow the sound to the clearing near the forge. There, a group of villagers sits in a wide circle, each holding a simple tool. They're carving, not weapons, not bowls. Teeth, but not real ones, just pieces of bone and ivory, shaped to resemble teeth and then decorated in dozens of ways. Some are filed into jagged points. Some are etched with curling runes. Others are inlaid with tiny shards of shell or colored stone. You ask what this is, and Yora answers without turning around. Practice. Turns out, filing real teeth wasn't something done impulsively. At least, not always. Many Vikings started by carving mock teeth first. They'd wear them around the neck or braid them into hair. They'd show them to family, to clan elders. It was like submitting a sketch before inking the final tattoo. Historians still debate whether this preparatory phase was widespread or a local custom. Some burial sites contain carved tooth replicas, suggesting a ritual progression. Dream it, carve it, then become it. Quirky moment of the morning? One young carver finishes his bone tooth, holds it up proudly, and immediately drops it into a chicken coop. The chickens claim it as their own. No one retrieves it. Later, someone jokes that the next sacred animal will be a rooster with fangs. As the day unfolds, you learn that these mock teeth weren't just for planning, they were also offerings. Some were burned, others buried. A few were even flung into the sea with whispered prayers. If I lose this one, may the next one come true. You rub ash into the cuts to darken them. You hold it up. It's not fierce, it's not elegant, but it's real. Later, you hang it on a leather cord and wear it under your shirt where no one can see but you. That night, as the village gathers for a midsummer meal, someone asks if you're planning to file your own teeth. The question hangs in the air like steam from the stew pots. You answer honestly, I don't know. Not for your uncertainty, but for your honesty. Because here's the thing, this tradition, as ancient and bold as it may be, isn't about pressure. It's about readiness. It's about claiming something when the moment feels right, not when others tell you it should be. Historians still wrestle with the idea of agency in Viking culture. With the prominence of clan loyalty, honor codes, and warrior hierarchies, how much personal freedom did individuals really have? Were tooth modifications mandated by leaders? Or were they one of the few truly personal choices someone could make? Watching this village, you start to think it was the latter. Because even in this tight-knit community where every cough gets noticed and every absence remarked upon, there's a strange respect for solitude. For that space people need before making a permanent choice. You wander outside the fire circle and look up. The stars are thick tonight, crowded, like a sky that hasn't learned to edit itself. You hold your mock tooth in your hand and think about what it would feel like to turn it real. To sit in the cave or beside the fire and press a stone to your enamel. To change yourself, not through speech or fashion or performance, but with pain, with intention. Not to impress anyone, but to remember who you are when no one's watching. Quirky theory time? Some anthropologists think file teeth helped with cold resistance, that exposing more nerve might trigger heat retention responses. Others say that's nonsense, and the modification was purely symbolic. But you like the idea. That pain could somehow prepare you for winter. That's what this whole tradition feels like. Preparation, for grief, for glory, for the unknown. For becoming, the next morning someone arrives, not a villager, not a relative. A traveler from a distant fjord, his cloak still stiff with salt, his boots spattered in foreign mud. He carries a walking stick carved with faces smiling, snarling, silent. You can't tell if he's a seer or a liar, maybe both. But the village treats him with deference, not fear, respect. You follow the low murmurs as he sits in the longhouse, sipping hot broth, eyes darting from face to face like he's reading the future on their skin. Eventually, someone asks him the question everyone's been thinking. Did they do it where you came from too? And definitely not comfortable to wear. He must reapply it constantly, must taste metal every time he speaks. Quirky note? There are historical accounts, fringe ones, of warriors using metal powders or veneers to coat filed teeth. Not just for decoration, but for intimidation. Imagine facing down someone in battle whose mouth flashed like a coin purse. You feel it again, that subtle chill that comes not from cold, but from proximity to something other. He begins to speak, his voice smooth and unhurried. In my village, he says, we file for silence. Some scholars believe there were entire roles in society, keepers of knowledge, who trained themselves not to speak unless asked directly. This man might be one of them. You sit beside him for a while. He doesn't speak unless spoken to. But when you ask him the question, did it hurt? He nods. Of course. If it didn't, I wouldn't trust it. A man who swallows truth, swallows pain, swallows identity until it becomes something else. He shows you a pouch of painted bone teeth tokens like the ones you saw being carved earlier. Except his are used, not as jewelry, as currency. Each one a vow he made to someone. Each one a secret he carries. He presses one into your palm. It's warm somehow, heavy. I won't tell you what it means, he says. But if you ever forget who you are, hold it in your mouth until you remember. You walk through the village slowly, watching people as if for the first time. How many carry their truths inside their mouths? How many have carved their silence into bone? You realize something strange. Most people associate filed teeth with expression, fury, pride, aggression. But maybe, for some, it was the opposite. A muzzle they chose for themselves. A symbol not of what they wanted the world to see, but what they chose not to say. Historians still puzzle over the social rules of tooth marking. Were there punishments for false symbols? Could someone file their teeth to pretend they'd achieved something they hadn't? And if caught, what then? Exile? Refiling? Public unmarking? There are no known accounts of unfiling. Once done, it was permanent. You bore it for life, truth or lie. Svalger leaves before dawn the next day. No goodbyes. Just a faint gleam of silver teeth in the firelight as he disappears into the mist. And yet, somehow you feel fuller for having met him. The village returns to normal rhythms. But now silence feels louder, not empty, just rich with meaning. Like maybe the absence of words is its own kind of testimony. You tuck the token tooth into your pouch, just in case. The days stretch longer now, thick with the hum of bees and the creak of sun-warmed wood. You've nearly lost count of how long you've been here. The village, once strange, now fits around you like a second skin. You know which step on the longhouse floor groans. Which goat will try to eat your sleeve. Which children will try to convince you that squirrels are good luck, especially the angry ones. But something is changing again. It's not loud. It's not sudden. It's internal. You start noticing your reflection more not out of vanity, but curiosity. In puddles. In bronze plates, even in someone's polished shield. Each time, your eyes drift to your mouth, still untouched, still smooth. But now you wonder, would a single groove mean something? A mark for this journey, this version of you? You mention it tentatively to Yora. She doesn't laugh, doesn't nod. She says, only if it's the kind of pain you need. Later, you sit beside a man named Fenric, who has an entire row of filed teeth. Not just the front ones, all of them. He's older with a voice like smoked honey and a laugh that rattles your ribs. You ask what each tooth means. He pulls a stick from the fire and points to one molar. That one? For my daughter. When she was born, he taps another. That's when I lost my brother. Then another. That's when I stole a horse and learned I was terrible at riding. Quirky detail? One of his lower teeth is filed into a lightning bolt, not jagged, not aggressive. Stylized. Like it was done for art, not intimidation. There's no rule, he says. Only the truth. Or bone-bound poetry. That thought hits you harder than expected. Later, you find yourself alone with your carved token. The practice tooth, the one you make crooked and strange. You run your fingers along its edge, remembering how awkward you felt holding the carving blade, how clumsy your lines were. And yet now it feels sacred. Not because it's perfect, because it's yours. You walk through the quiet forest, seeking no one in particular. The trees stretch high, their canopies whispering things you can't quite translate. You end up by a fallen log, soft with moss, and sit for a long time. There's a stone nearby, sharp, smooth, balanced in your hand like it was made for it. You lift it. Press it lightly against your front tooth, not enough to scratch, but enough to feel the possibility of change. You could do it now. You could leave this village not just with memory, but with a mark that lasts. But you don't. Not yet. Because something deep inside you, something quiet and wise says, wait. Historians still argue about consent and ancient body modifications. Were people pressured into it by tradition? Family? Leaders? Or was there always a personal line, one drawn not in law but in the heart? You suspect the truth is complicated. But here in this village, among these people, you've seen hesitation honored as much as commitment. You rise from the log and pocket the stone. Just in case. That night, a small feast is held for a young couple who have decided to leave the village, not out of exile by choice. They want to see the outer islands, find their own stories, mark their own teeth their way. The village celebrates them with food, laughter, and a surprising amount of very bad poetry. One verse rhymes fjord with board. They stand before the fire and each removes a small carved token from their pouch replica teeth just like yours. And they toss them into the flames. To burn the question, the man says. So we're free to find the answer. Not the storm-snarling kind from weeks ago, but something quieter, thoughtful. It moves through the village like a messenger, unsure whether to speak or just linger at the threshold. You feel it in your bones. Something is winding down. The longhouse feels more spacious lately. People still laugh, still bicker, still pass bowls of stew with casual generosity. But you've noticed more glances toward the horizon. More sentences ending in silence. Even Yora, who usually hums tunelessly while chopping fish, pauses today and looks at the sky like it's telling her a secret in a language she almost remembers. You ask, what is it? Still more wrinkles than movement. But now he holds a fresh strip of wood across his knees, carving something with a thin flint knife. You sit, he doesn't look up. Still got your teeth, I see. The sagas are full of vengeance, longing, grief, but rarely hesitation. Some believe regret was a private thing, unspoken. A weight carried alone. Maybe that's why some people marked their teeth to speak what couldn't be said. Rain taps the wood in his lap. He's carving another face, familiar, still expression. Triangular teeth. You reach out and touch the edge. It's the one from the cave, you whisper. He nods. I dreamed it again last night. But this time, it opened its mouth. Like he's finally said everything that needed saying. When you rise, the village looks different. Not changed. Just clarified. Sharper around the edges, like your vision's finally adjusted to the light. You pack slowly that evening. Not because you're in a rush to leave, but because something inside you says it's time. The village doesn't stop you. Doesn't hold a farewell feast. That's not their way. Instead, Yor finds you before dawn and presses something into your palm. It's your mock tooth. But it's been burnished, smoothed, and etched with a tiny symbol, a wave curling over itself. For remembering, she says, and then she walks away. You carry it with you down to the shore. The boat is waiting, quiet in the tide. Before stepping in, you turn back one last time. The village is just shadows now, framed by trees and fog and memory. But you swear you see someone standing at the edge. A shape, a glint of triangular teeth. A smile that doesn't demand anything, just approval. You set sail. The wind pushes gentle against the sail, and the shore slips behind you like a dream that finally knows how it ends. You hold the token up to your teeth, just for a second. Just long enough to imagine the bite. Historians still ask whether the Vikings truly believed in fate. Whether they thought their lives were prewritten, or if each scar, each choice, each filed tooth rewrote the saga from scratch. But you know the answer now, they believed in both. Because to file your teeth wasn't to surrender. It was to choose how you would face whatever came next, even if it hurt. Even if no one remembered. Even if you were the only one who ever saw the shape of your smile. The sea is quiet. Not flat, there's always a pulse beneath you, a subtle sway that keeps time like an ancient metronome but calm enough to lull you. The sail creaks now and then, gulls cry overhead, and the shore has vanished entirely behind a curtain of soft morning mist. You're alone and not alone. The stories still sit with you. Each one a tooth in your memory, filed sharp or smoothed down depending on how you turn them. The woman who marked the left for her past. The silver-tongued wanderer who filed for silence. Rain's dream, Yora's wave. You feel them in your mouth even now. Like invisible threads drawn across each molar, tugging gently. You bite down and almost expect a crunch. You take out the token again, your practiced tooth. Funny, it's lighter now. Or maybe you're heavier, anchored by what you've learned. You turn it over in your palm as the boat slides toward a coastline that looks unfamiliar. Somewhere new, somewhere waiting. Quirky thought? You start wondering how modern people might mark themselves if they lived like the Vikings. Would we file our wisdom teeth for every time we doubted ourselves? Paint canines for the dreams we buried? Etch grooves in honor of heartbreak survived? You grin. Probably not. Modern dentists would riot. But maybe, just maybe, there's a reason these stories endure. Historians still question whether the Viking Age ever really ended. Sure, the raids stopped. The ships rotted. Christianity swept through like a fresh coat of snow. But the ideas? The rituals? The marks? They linger. Reimagined, rebranded, but still sharp under the surface. The boat finally nudges against a rocky shore. You step off, feet sinking slightly into sand. A new place. A new beginning. But the story doesn't leave you. It hums in your bones. It sits in the back of your throat. It lingers in your smile. You reach up and touch your front tooth gently. Still smooth, but not unmarked. Because what you carry now isn't just knowledge, it's transformation. You haven't filed your teeth. But you felt it. The friction. The choice. The moment just before you change. And sometimes that's enough. You take a breath, not deep, not dramatic, just steady. And walk forward into the fog. The world opens slowly, not with noise, but with possibility. And now, as your eyelids grow heavier and your breath begins to lengthen, you feel the quiet wrap itself around you like a warm wool cloak. The story softens, fading into a gentle murmur, like waves lapping at the edges of memory. You've walked with the Vikings, not just across their windswept cliffs and in smoky longhouses, but deep into the caverns of their rituals.